I think there's few organizations that can teach you leadership at that young of an age. Like, sure, you can do your own startup. You can learn through the mistakes that you inevitably do when you step into management in the first couple of leadership roles you get, right? The military gives you a very structured and very proven format for how to lead others and how to do that in a way that inspires them and effectively draws the map for the problem to be solved.
Hey, Daniel, super excited to have you today on our show. So we've been chatting for a little bit. You are doing something special at Mews, and would love to dig into some of the insights of building the finance function and modern finance function at the one of the fastest growing companies here in Europe. So, maybe just to get things started, just curious, sort of, like your background from military intelligence to mobile payments, IPO acquisition, then to CFO of one of the Europe's fastest growing hospitality platforms. So you led finance teams through different phases: scale, billion-dollar acquisition. So curious, sort of your experience from military intelligence to the CFO of Mews. What's one lesson from the army that still shapes how you lead?
That's a really good question. And thank you for having me, first of all, right? The military is a little bit of a cliche. And I think every ex-military person that you'll talk to will tell you this as well. We all remember the fun stuff, like all of the pranks, all of the mischiefs that we were up to together with our comrades. You don't remember the fact that you had to walk 80K with heavy packing to be able to get your beret and all of the bits and bobs that came around that, right? You only remember the friends and the lessons you take with you. I will say that regardless of the problem that I have been tasked to solve, the thing that have helped me immensely from the military is that, and I might be disproven in the future, but I've never done anything that was remotely as hard as what I did there. Like, you become very attuned to where your personal threshold, like how far you can take yourself in terms of the amount of work that you can pick up, how quickly you can run, how much you can do, and the complexity that you can manage before either you break, your sleep breaks, or quality suffers accordingly. So I think it's been a very, very healthy lesson in self-awareness, first and foremost. If you look at what do you actually use professionally after you come out of the service. And beyond that, if we look at domain awareness, I think there's few organizations that can teach you leadership at that young of an age. Like, sure, you can do your own startup. You can learn through the mistakes that you inevitably do when you step into management in the first couple of leadership roles you get, right? The military gives you a very structured and very proven format for how to lead others and how to do that in a way that inspires them and effectively draws the map for the problem to be solved. So I think it's those two things mainly that's been sticking with me. My professional training as such, I've fortunately not had to use that much of in a professional context.
Yeah, fantastic. So what you're saying is that, like all the business all the business challenges, they're like very easy compared to.
Well, they become easy, right? But it's the same thing as when we look and when we dig into that later on in this call as well, to the points of your intro. Like, the engineering problem is usually the easy one to solve for. Like, in its most basic form, it's just logic and math. If you reduce it down to brass tacks, the hard thing is the people aspects, getting them with you, making sure that everyone understands what they're supposed to do, when they need to do it, how they should do it, and motivating them to be able to go through that as well. And that motivation is something that the military does very well. And there's this cliche, of course, that it's cheating because you can't refuse. You have to follow orders. In reality, as everyone that's been in the military will tell you, well, that's all good and great on paper. In reality, it's you and 5 other guys or girls out in the forest, and then they have weapons. So you need to be very mindful of how you tell that story to ensure that it's motivation and inspiration that drives them beyond anything else.
Incredible. Daniel, what's your personal story, where you grew up, and what was your path to being interested in finance? Curious sort of, if you can share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So I was raised in a very, very small part of, or small town in Sweden. Wasn't much to do there, less of a steel mill and, well, the basic education and everything that came with that. But if you wanted a proper training for you, or if you wanted to do something more educated, you had to unfortunately move that little village or move from that village. So I joined the military. Then once I left the military, I started looking around, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Applied for a couple of different things. It was medical, it was chemistry, it was mathematics. Ended up doing that, which led into finance, which led into where I find myself at this point in time. I think that the motivating thing has been the problem to solve and the type of problem to solve. I always feel like while engineering is a very interesting and very noble profession, it almost feels a little bit like cheating because there is a solution to the problem. It's not necessarily a no solution to a problem, but there is a solution to the problem. When you go into languages or more human subjects, philosophy, there isn't necessarily an answer to the problem. So I like the fact that there is a tangible way to solve it, and then you can just apply it to various problem statements to try to make it really good.
Fantastic. So maybe one thing to clear out, everyone talks about the islettle exit, and yeah, so there was preparation for the IPO, and then yeah, and then acquisition. So what walk us through what happened there in the final months of that deal.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as far as it can be disclosed, the so we prepared everything for IPO readiness. We built the data rooms. We went through all of the controls. We ensured that the company was ready for all purposes and intent to not only withhold up and hold up to the scrutiny that the regulators were to impose upon us, rightfully so, if we find ourselves in listed full. That data room and that infrastructure and those controls that all but also are built in association with IPO readiness also it also creates a very transparent data set, which you can use for a dual track, which is most commonly used for that dual track as well. What we had there is that we had a very, very closed group of individuals, a handful, that entertained a couple of discussions on the sidelines to see if there was a strategic opportunity for what could come out of that rather than going to market and pushing through the IPO. After a couple of discussions, the one opportunity that materialized itself was that of PayPal. And what was attractive to them, but also attractive to us, to be quite fair at that point in time, was that they, as we know, and they still have a very deep and very impressive merchant base in the US, while we managed to unlock scale and fiscalization problems that we needed to solve for in Europe. And they've tried to do that a couple of times before. They had a proposition called PayPal here. It did okay in the US, but it didn't really manage to break any ground from an international perspective. So when they started looking at that, they said that, hey, you've solved this hard problem over here that we haven't solved for. You're telling us and like prospective investors and anchors, right, that potential ground for you to be broken to be able to further the expansion and the growth rate of the company on a post IPO basis is to go into the US. We already have this user base. So it's effectively an internal marketing exercise with fairly like manageable CAC numbers because it's our user base. We can do cross-sell correspondingly towards your European user base. So let's see if we can do some fun stuff. And then that spun up some discussions. And the day before we were supposed to file the prospectus, got a call from one of the co-founders and said, we're taking a slightly different route. And then that led into accelerated due diligence. Then that led into the sale. Then that led into an antitrust investigation in the UK primarily, which then came out clean because everything was done with good intent. And then following that, if memory recalls, we spent 1.5 years doing integrations, trying merging payment licenses, merging tech stacks, doing all of those bits and bobs. So that was a educational journey. In hindsight, probably, but hindsight is 2020. Something that gave PayPal a really good tech stack, and coverage and more coverage in Europe, and probably put us in a pretty good position as well, right? Because after we came out to that antitrust investigation, COVID came through. And then
Yeah.
if you had the biggest e-commerce platform in the world, you had one experience. If you had a modern but sleek payments terminal to facilitate in-person SMB business, you probably had a very different experience.
I was part of Plaid during the process of Visa acquisition that never happened.
Yep.
So it took 6 months or maybe 9 months of the reviews, and then was kind of pretty challenging time for the company internally because we didn't know what's going to happen. Do you feel like it was hard to manage sort of a different narrative? So there was like one narrative inside the company, and then like something else happened, so that the team is
There's
fully
always
sort of like
going
on
to be
board.
speculation when you're acquired, right? The only one that knows exactly, or the only one that knows the true intent, or the only one that has a roadmap that is probably closest to what the intent of the acquirer is the acquiring team or the deal team on the acquirer side. The acquiree will always have everything from internal rumors to speculation to you'll look at post acquisitions they've done, if they've ever done anything, and try to deduce learnings from that. What we found was most efficient was just to default into the problem to be solved. Because in the end of the day, like you sit people down and you say, we understand that this is scary. We understand that there's a lot of things going on. But the problem that we're here to solve is going to be here for the foreseeable future. In the end of the day, this is a company as any other. It promotes growth. It promotes traction. Deliver that and things will turn out okay. If they don't turn out okay, people will see that you delivered this and they will take you with them to the next journey, wherever that might take them in the next growth story. So keeping focus on the problem to be solved, we found was good. It's not necessarily only a distraction, but also to keep the eyes on the ball, if you so will. But it's also always going to be a volatile period in any target once it's acquired. But because Visa turned around and picked up Tink instead, right? Just across the street from us. There you go.
Exactly. That's not something we expected to happen at that time. But whatever it is.
Right
Daniel, super exciting topic. So you building the finance as a product org. I don't think many companies do that. So it was actually exactly the same for us at Uber in the early days as well. So definitely sort of like some of the players actually doing it that way.
Yeah.
So you built an engineering team inside finance at Mews. Why?
Because I think that the most honest thing to do is to keep the company accountable, to keep me accountable to the same things that I keep the company accountable to in my capacity as the CFO, right? I will, within the constraints of the funding available, I will always happily entertain a discussion about hiring people to solve new problems, because you don't know what you don't know, right? It's unreasonable to require from anyone. I mean, in a period where we have not only Google, but also many and good LLMs to our disposal, we can figure out a lot of things that we don't know. But in the end of the day, we don't know what we don't know. So if you're going to do a new market, or if you need a new license, or you're going to go IPO, or you're going to unlock something that you have never done before, you probably are going to have to find some people to come with you on that journey if you're going to increase the likelihood of success. What I don't want to entertain is a discussion about why you need more people to do the same thing. And people always have these fantastic business cases when they come up, they present and say, look, here I can do 4 of this thing if I have one person. So next year you're telling me 100% growth. So obviously I need to hire another one, right? Then I can do 8. And when you hire 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 people to do those things, I mean, often labor is more cost efficient short term than building an entire ecosystem of systems to be able to stand all of that up. But after a while, when you start coming and asking us for 20, 30, 50 people to be able to do what you need to do to scale, like I understand that we are going to have to deploy capital towards solving this problem, but I don't want to have a discussion around how many bodies you want. Like, we need to have a discussion around why we will take that capital and deploy it towards engineering to make sure that this problem is a capacity hole that we can plug. Otherwise, you're just going to come and ask me for 80 people next year, right? And the rationale is still going to be sound. You're still going to argue for the fact that you need people to be able to fill the capacity hole, and that's fine. But after a while, we need to ask ourselves what our right to scale actually is. Because similar to you guys, right, and girls as well, if we are tech companies, the reason why we carry the valuation multiples that we do is because we scale technology. If we scale humans, we're professional services. Then we might as well just be a law firm. We're not a tech company anymore. So my theory and the architectural principle that we have from a processing perspective when we think about finance in Mews is we will hire the best people from a domain perspective to be able to lead engineers and tell them what good looks like. But we will hire a limited amount of people to actually deal with capacity. This is all just data problems in the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. How do you motivate and get excited those engineers to working on the internal products?
They drive some fairly extreme requirements, which some people, especially on the data architecture and the data engineering and analytics, or analytical engineering side, find to be really interesting. Because while you can, if you look at it from a product perspective, assuming that you don't build fintech, you'll probably get away with 99.5 degrees of accuracy when it comes to how you package data from a customer-facing perspective. If you look at marketing analytics or sales analytics, you can probably get away with less because iteration speed becomes more important to be able to react to the market, right? When you look at something like finance, the degrees of data accuracy that is required from you are redonkulous after a little while. The extremes of that, if you find yourself, as I did at iSettle PayPal in previous lives as well, if you're a bank, like, you'll lose your license, your literal license to operate if you misreport enough times. If you are in listed form and you misreport, especially if you find yourself listed in the US, you will be sued to kingdom come. So the downside of making something, or the downside of trying to shortchange some of those requirements, are just simply unacceptable. And if you are an engineer that is triggered by complexity and trying to solve a problem to a degree that no one has solved before, then this is usually a quite interesting space to go into. Because while a lot of people have built very high level accuracy fintech stacks and banking backends and transactional subledgers, not a lot of people have actually automated an entire finance team.
Yeah, that's pretty much a lot of engineers on our team as well, getting
Yeah.
motivated by just like very, very complex systems and so requirements of like reliability and accuracy, as you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I
What
love the
tools?
fact that you guys are doing what you're doing. And there's another interesting Dutch company called Duna that does a similar thing on the risk side. And it's just these things that I'm at the risk of showing the gray in my beard here are like the things that we've had to try to build in the last 15 to 20 years because the technology has just simply not existed from a commoditized perspective. Like, if this can actually be something you can buy off the shelf, great. That means that we can spend our R&D dollars on something else. But it is a new wave of technology that is coming through where we've seen, if you go back 10 years, right, we were in the maturity wave of SaaS for all the ERPs as they were coming into cloud. And the promise was that everything will be automated. I don't think anything was actually ever automated in the end of the day. Recon to a certain degree, if you look at solutions like Blackline, Flowcast, and so forth, but nothing from a processing perspective was actually ever properly automated. So if someone can now go in there and use technology fit for 2025, that is a really interesting proposition.
Companies been buying different CFO tool automations for the last 20 years. And like, if you calculate all of the ROIs that were promised, probably, like, we should have been fully automated, like 10 years ago. But that's not the reality. So what tools have you built in-house that you are most proud of?
We have just formed the teams in full transparency. So we have now started to stand up what is this is going to be a very boring answer, but if you want to do anything and you want to do it properly within this space, you always, always, always start with the data layer. Like, you can use whatever tools you want to in the end of the day when it comes to application level architecture, but if you can't harvest the data from that and stand that up in your database layer of choice and actually get that into a place where you can ship that data in a governed, accurate, and controlled fashion, when you're gonna pick your favorite car brand, Ferrari, Lamborghini, whatever, put that in your driveway with no gas in it. I guess useless. So the thing you always start with is the data layer and the data infrastructure. So what we've done now is that our team has built this into a really good state for the first couple of iterations. And what we're going for initially is to be able to automate a lot of the reporting, is to be able to size what is the current state and performance of the company itself. Because while we can do a lot of things through planning and budget cycles where we say, hey, we want to run efficiencies. Like, yeah, but the meta reflection you need to ask yourself first and foremost is the efficiency of what? Like, if you can't measure the thing, we can all just sit here and violently agree with each other that things are going to be more efficient. But if you can't measure it, it will never exist. It will never come into fruition. So we're starting the performance management layer of this, call it FP&A if you want to define it by a given finance use case, right? After this, what we will do then is that we'll recycle the same data and we will start looking into the accounting side when it comes to the GL entries and all of the ongoing accounts and bookings. Because in the end of the day, if there's logic enough for a human to be able to do this, and it's not on the M&A side where we're breaking new ground or the new product side, then it's automatable. So the very boring but fair answer is that it's all data infrastructure, and that's where we're starting.
Yeah. Daniel, if you had whatever number, 10, 20, 30, 50 best engineers working with you today, and you could build anything in the finance realm, what would that be? Maybe not necessarily from Mews internally, but could be just like a finance product.
Well, it's that capital and time, right? My utopia is a finance dark factory where that just runs by itself. It closes the books sometimes. It's all data that just comes from the same business systems every month on a repeatable form. It's all automatable, right? The things that I would love to have is to have that base plate and foundation upon which the company and the finance function rests, to then be able to use our people, who I still very much want in the business, for the ones that are with us today, to work on creative things. So I would say that the litmus test for us having been successful, for me, is that our people are now doing creative things rather than repeatable things. They're partnering together with the product team, trying to figure out how do we get a new product into our infrastructure? How do we need to map that for the machine then to do its thing on a repeatable fashion? How do we integrate a new M&A target? How do we adapt to new regulation coming our way? So what I would like in its most basic form, to fairly answer your question as well, is that reoccurring accounting machine for accounting itself, or for all GL entries and all consolidations and all rollouts, because it all holds logic. And it's just a problem that hasn't been solved. And I always find myself surprised when we go through these RFPs, that the ERP layer and the consolidation layer still hasn't solved that problem. Like, you can automate AP, you can automate AR, you can automate expense processing, and there's a couple of point solutions out there that are really good at it. But if we're going to be a bit crass, the really hard problem to solve is not that. Like, those are point solutions that you can make money from. But the really interesting thing is how you solve for a fully automated ERP experience and just create the dark factory out of finance.
Yeah. So this thing that you said about sort of people working on creative side of the things is really interesting. So yeah, we're speaking with a lot of finance leaders, and basically today everyone trying to be more strategic and get their teams to do that work. But then when you look at the composition of the team, it's like, all right, so you have 100 people, like what they're doing? Like, oh, 80 of them are actually closing the books. So yeah, there is sort of aim and then reality, and yeah, it's kind of interesting to see how it's gonna how it's going to evolve. On that note, curious. So you mentioned people, and so when you build your team, what are the skills you're looking for? What are the spikes for the folks in your team you value?
This is going to sound like a LinkedIn cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. And I guess all cliches has a level of truth to them, right? I only want to hire people that are smarter than myself, which is honestly not that hard because I'm a generalist in the end of the day. So when I hire for my direct layer, be that my lead on FP&A, my accounting lead, my engineering lead, my corporate finance lead, we hire experts from those given fields, right? So I want someone who comes in there and not necessarily teaches me things, but where my responsibility as a leader is effectively to coach them, buy them champagne, and give them capital. Because if that is the thing that I'm solving for in the end of the day, they will outshine and outrun anything that I can ever do as an individual. And that's just realizing through the hard ways. And I'm sure you've done this hard lesson throughout your career as well, that like I can work 16 hours per day. That is not a problem. But in the end of the day, that's just two high capacity FTEs, right? If I can make my entire team 10, 15% more impactful over 100 plus humans, that's a whole lot of output. So trying to figure out how do you build a team that has outsized capacity within the specific problems and domains that you want to solve for, and then enable them through coaching to be really, really good, I found to be very impactful. The challenge that comes on the back of that is, of course, is that if all the people that you hire are better than you, how will you ever be able to double check the work or control the work, right? And how do you know that good is actually what is manifesting? And then you have the OKR frameworks, the control mechanisms that comes with that, and so forth. The the thing that we're looking for when it comes to layers below in the organization is really like a level of builder mentality. Like if you're going to come into Muse and you're going to be successful over time, we find a lot of candidates who are hesitant every now and again because they feel like, okay, I want to build something, I want to make an impact, I want to make a mark. And then, but what am I going to do when this stabilizes? So, like, let me tell you a story about our growth rate. Like, this is not stabilizing anytime soon. Once you saturate existing markets, you do the next market or the next product line, or you go out and buy a new product line and try to integrate that one. So people who are genuinely interested in trying to figure out the systems level thinking for how things will work well, that is what's interesting. It's a really hard thing to try to recruit for as well. But once you find people who are genuinely curious, that tends to pay itself off in bundles.
They know, and very practically. So, on the point of like up hiring, so how do you sort of create a process for that? So, I don't know, like if you participate in all interviews within the team, or because usually sort of what I'm seeing as well is just for someone to up hire, it's very hard. It's very hard actually seeing someone is better than you. And people tend to sort of like just miss some of the signals during the interview process. Like maybe like very practically, if you can talk a little bit about sort of like how do you structure interviews? What is the process overall?
I think it requires, yes, it is. But I think speaking to the one of the things that you brought up in the beginning of our discussion as well, right? Things to learn from the military. Like, do you want to sit in that trench next to someone better than yourself? Not. It's a pretty easy decision. I find that nowadays it's pretty easy. Back in the good old days, it used to be quite hard because back in the days you had to do a lot of research. Now, if you're an innately curious individual, that's not a problem anyway, right? You'll go out there, you've identified a need. You've probably done that through identifying symptom more than root cause, right? You worked your way back and you figured out that there's something that we're not doing right or something we do not know. Back in the good old days, get off my lawn and so forth. You had to go out, talk to a couple of friends like that you thought were wiser than you in that domain. They will give you some insights. You'll talk to more people that will give you some insights, and then your pattern recognition tells you, okay, maybe I need to do something about this. You then had to do a fair amount of research in what good looks like in that domain by either speaking to even more people or reading even more books. And then you can start to build out what is going to be your interview set of questions, right? And the case study that you're going to take these candidates through as well. But that was all just through research. Nowadays, if you figure out what your problem is, probably again through experiencing the symptom, working your way back, you can just use an LLM. Like I have these problems. I have this persona. I'm trying to hire someone that can solve problems X, Y, and Z. What would some high level applicable and suitable interview questions be in a good case study for that? And then you'll just have to use your common sense for if that is a good set of questions or not. So I think that the methodology, similar to a lot of the usage that we're seeing on the LLM side today, is roughly the same as it's always been, but it makes us ridiculously much more efficient in terms of how quickly we can run with these things instead of having to go and sit in the library for a couple of hours and try to figure it out. You ask the LLM question, you have an answer within 5 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, if you think about next 5-10 years and how the finance function will be changing, do you see that? Like, if I were part of your team, what would you recommend me in terms of up leveling my skills to be relevant 5-10 years from now?
I think it's always good for someone to go out there and learn the basics of data management. Like be that you learn how to reuse Databricks extensively for our data warehousing. If you want to learn that specific solution, you have to have a practical anchor to start in and be able to use that in your job and learn the logic for how data flows, learn the logic for data governance, learn the patterns for how to extract, verify, and use yourself. That is always a good place to start because once you understand what the data piping of the company looks like, you also understand how the blood or fuel of the company actually flows, right? I would encourage you to go out and learn. I mean, it doesn't have to be, we'll see exactly where this market evolves in the end of the day, right? But it feels like a fairly certain bet that prompt engineering won't necessarily be something that you'll not do in 5 years' time. It might get to an even higher level of natural language processing where we don't have to ask what is currently slightly artificial questions, but that is, of course, going to be something that you absolutely need. After that, I would hope that in 5, especially in 10 years' time, we've gotten to a place where the dark factory of finance is largely ran by engineers. So the thing that you should really focus on and learning is probably the regulation. Because in the end of the day, that is what you're largely going to interact with the world around you for, be that by talking to regulators, your shareholders, be that with exchanges or any applicable regulator that you might have to interact with. I'm hoping, or I believe strongly, just on the back of Moore's law and the evolution that we're seeing in this space with companies like yourself and others, that we will come into a place where this is largely an automated job in the end of the day. I can't imagine that accountants will not act as salespeople on a highly efficient Salesforce stack or HubSpot stack today, where everything is more or less catered to them. That this is just the bane of finance in the end of the day. And while there's still a lot of opportunity here, I mean, this is not the thing you invest in initially because it's perceived to not drive revenue. But I think a lot of companies fool themselves through the lens of lost opportunity cost when it comes to that. Because if you go out there and you actually scale this entire infrastructure, what that means effectively is that I won't be coming to our CEO and our board, our shareholders, and ask for even more, like 50 more people next year, right? Because we took the money and the engineers we had and we deployed them towards the front of the gates, because that's where we drive revenue. And the thing that drives revenue will always have outsized impact. But if we automate the problems that I have as well, that means that I won't ask for more people. I'll need some licensing costs for capacity, but that's dismal in comparison to hiring humans, which means that we can take all of that money and push that straight into the Salesforce. So I hope that we'll find ourselves in a position where a lot of this gets fully automated as such. Data infrastructure regulation and the ability to interact with said systems is probably going to be the thing that is going to be most valuable for the individuals that find themselves coming into this domain.
Yeah, sounds like interesting and exciting future, but at the same time challenging in terms of the change for
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
for
I
many of
mean,
us.
yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting now that as we see technology catching up, especially on the ERP side and on the finance side. The only thing that we know for sure is that universities won't catch up instantly. Like they will keep on educating and training accountants in the same way that they do today for the better part of the next 2 decades, right? So I think it's going to be largely up to those students or potentially private interest groups to try to incentivize them to go out there and learn these things for them actually to be competitive within the workforce, to learn data, to learn basic programming, to learn how to automate a lot of things. Because if there's one thing we do see in the finance side is a lot of opportunity space for those skill sets to go in and have an outsized impact, because the workforce or the technical savviness of the finance workforce still leaves some to be desired. So that is a really interesting in not only to build yourself into the success, successful place for where finance is in 5 to 10 years, but also just to be able to get your first gig, right? And have outsized impact in your first company that you come into by being able to add that as a skill set to the team.
Yep, absolutely. Daniel, you mentioned ERPs a couple of times, and I think this is piece of the technology that in the past couple of decades obviously gave a lot of productivity gains for many companies. But as technology evolves, seems like lagging behind on some of the automation tools. What's your prediction? Where do you think this market will go? What's going to actually be happening, changing in this space over the next decade?
I think we'll see something similar that we saw on the fintech side, and we've seen on most SaaS stacks. In the end of the day, there will be a lot of good teams coming up with a lot of challenging ideas in terms of what can be done and how things can be done differently. I think that 80% of all of those who lost through building themselves into a scale up state, because growth is hard, as you also know. The I think 80% of those will find themselves being acquired and find themselves integrated into the larger stacks, be that on the back of the Oracle ERP, SAP, or pick your frenemy, if you so will, because that is largely how those players innovate at this point in time, which is very similar to the reason why PayPal picked up myself, right? You pay an outsized purchase price for something that is effectively de-risking your own growth, because if you were to build yourself, could have built that solution themselves for 2 billion? Absolutely. But the risk involved in doing it is massive, right? Difference from letting 20 aggressive startups fight it out and see who comes out on top, and then you go out and pick them up and integrate it, right? I think the 20% of the rest of them that come through the scale up phase is going to be the new and next generation of ERP solutions out there, similar to what we've seen before as well. Similar to what's the comparison we should use from a fintech's perspective there? Maybe Nubank out of Brazil, right? The difference from being acquired by one of the giants and just becoming part of that stack and the financial or the technology of revolution of someone's infrastructure, they're now actually leaning into becoming one of the global players. So I think that's the current evolution and the current wave that we see in front of us when it comes to financial technology is going to largely help the incumbents keep up to speed. Just enable they become part of that through M&A, or be inspired, and also drive some development by proxy as such in those larger companies. And in other cases, we'll see a completely new generation of large players slowly coming up there. But there, the everlasting challenge is, of course, like what's your feature parity to the big ones, right?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of software to build to
There
be
is.
to be at the par. But
Yeah. I mean, one of the ungrateful things, as you know as well, when it comes to growing billing for finance people, is that while there is a consolidation opportunity, all finance people, while not tax savvy, have a very strong-minded set of opinions for how they want things to work. While every engineer or every application architect will always tell you, like, if your process doesn't fit with this piece of software, you change your process. because otherwise you'll force the product to do unnatural things, and that will not work out well for you. Unfortunately, when you get something like a lawyer or an accountant who are fantastic in their domains, but do not understand the intuitive constraints of technology, that becomes a very interesting discussion.
Yeah. How do you do that, by the way, internally? Is it like you have your internal teams where it's like, I'd like to have a button here, and then they just like tell this to engineers, and like, so how do you actually decide what to build internally
With
for the
me,
finance?
in the end of the day, it's all an ROI, right? It doesn't make sense to do this, or can you click the button over there? And usually the answer is very, very simple. I find that when it comes to ensuring that technology is used in the way that technology was intended to be used, there is never a better time to raise those questions than upstream in the funnel. Like that has to be part of the RFP from the beginning. Because once you're committed to a technical vendor, you'll always discover that something wasn't exactly how you thought it was going to be. Someone has either sold your roadmap, or someone has misunderstood something, if we believe the best of intent between people, right? In the end of the day, we try to flesh out all of those requirements. We can only promise you that no business requirements will ever be perfect. It's just the nature of technology. And then we try to build our way as close to that spec as we possibly can come. The way that we then solve for it once it's actually up and running, and someone says, "Hey, I want the button over here, then over there," then that usually becomes a trade-off discussion around, well, we were planning to help this entire team over here that has nothing. Should we do that? Or do you want your button moved? And then, luckily, I work with very pragmatic people, which is the benefit of the technology industry, right?
Yeah, makes sense. Maybe shifting a little bit towards the AI. Do you mostly now internally build just like a traditional software, or you leverage AI as well? If you leverage AI, what was the most realistic use case you deployed today?
We do. We don't have it fully integrated in a lot of things right now. We use it as a tool for various things, but I would love for it to become more and more of an operator system over time. Unfortunately, with this being a heavily regulated space, those use cases is something that you have to run in parallel for quite some time before you can get to a level of comfort in being able to represent this. You also have the challenges of auditability, right? And due to the nature of an LLM and black box that it is, it's not necessarily something that regulators thrive towards the thought on. I think it was in the Netherlands where, who was that? Bank, right? That had to go to court with the DNB just to be able to use it in their underwriting models at all. The what we use it for is largely tooling to be able to make a lot of good operators that we have in the business become 10x engineers. It's like we go out there, every company will have something like 5 to 10% of their R&D force being like the 10x contributors, right? What my belief is in the current state, and if we talk in 6 months, I might have a very different answer for you. But right now, it's effectively the technology is mature enough to be able to take large parts of your workforce and make them have a 10x impact on what they can do. And that comes through either programming tools like Cursor or Replit or whatever integrated solution you want to use. The native AI functionality in Dataworks we use heavily when it comes to how we build our infrastructure as examples, right? We use Glean for internal knowledge search, where we mapped everything towards our Atlassian environment or Slack environment. All of the mails that you have on a personal basis is all searchable. And as a remote company that lives in Slack, the amount of time we now save for not going in there and trying to find in various threads who talked about what at some point in time or who dumped a presentation somewhere is been outsized. Would we love it to do more? Absolutely. But just being able to solve for that search functionality has been a fairly sizable impact for us in terms of how efficiently we can work. Over time, I would love to see LLMs be able to be more part of the operating fabric than they are today. If you think about something like cash recon, as an example, it's just notoriously something that no one likes to do in any finance team, but it's just one of the most important things that needs to be done in the end of the day. there's no reason why an LLM wouldn't be able to do the groundwork for you on that, right? And have your humans be the ones that effectively do QA, quality assurance, that yes, this makes sense, please book this. That's where I would love to see the technology be in, say, 6 months' time. And then in 12 months' time, I would love for that to be able to do that on slightly more complex relationships. I think matching on an AR perspective, as an example, between customers and invoices is fairly vanilla as a use case. That should be solvable within 2025. I think that recon on salaries is fairly easy. GDPR hard, but easy from a technical perspective. Expenses similar to that. But then when it comes to more complex relationships, if you think about consolidation as an example, or cash flow forecasting from a treasury perspective, I think that is opportunities that would be really interesting to see someone solve, say, in 2026 and going forward. That would bring significant impact in terms of how we could scale technology rather than humans.
Interesting. So you mentioned some of the interesting topics on like cash reconciliations as well, and I think that from the workflow perspective, some of the things that we're doing a lot of UX design research these days are around. So how do you change the mental model of the work as well? Because before you were doing the work, and now it's more about like exception handling, QA, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And it's somewhat sort of like changing the workflow, changing the mental model as well in terms of the approach.
Well, it is. It's like you no longer treat technology as technology. You treat, like, if you go back a year in time, we treated it as a rather unqualified but ambitious intern, and we had to process all of the output correspondingly that came from the AI. I think now we're probably at the level of maturity from a process and integration perspective, of course, subject to how you build it into your own environment. That is probably somewhere around, say, someone that is 2-3 years out of business school. Like the output that is coming out, and what we're now finding, especially in Apple's last white paper that they released a couple of days ago, we're finding that reasoning is not necessarily what the models do best at this point in time, but pattern recognition is in a really mature state. That doesn't mean that you want quality assured work. I mean, even though if we get into a completely functional dark factory setup in a future point in time with good technology, good data warehouses and AI agents that run on top of that, we'll still quality check the work before it goes to shareholders. And it's just how much do you need to do, and how high up in the organization do you do that quality check, right? I think that we have, to your point about the mental model, the juniors have been able to do a lot of that quality assurance for us, and we've been able to make the junior layers, the production layer of the finance factory, more efficient in the last 12 months. I think that as we go forward in the next 12 months, we'll find that going further and further up the food chain to a point where directors are possibly the ones that are quality assuring that work. I think that the big mental shift is going to be regarding it as a co-worker or co-producer, rather than in the way that you and I were born and raised when it came to how we regard SaaS, right? It's a tool. It's just slightly sharper than everything else, but it's really moving into becoming a co-worker.
Absolutely. Then also, your team is absolutely ahead of the curve in terms of the sort of like how you think about the technology. And so a lot of other teams still probably somewhat conservative. How do you get traditional finance teams comfortable with AI-driven products and technology?
Well, it's usually just it feels like a crass answer, but it's all just, again, an ROI calculation. Like when you start looking at it and you look at the cost of some of these tools, and then you look at the cost of hiring another human being or 5 new human beings just to be able to scale your technology. While no one likes to pay large licensing fees to a technology vendor, sorry to spoil your hopes, but if you start comparing it to the lost opportunity cost, or the lost opportunity cost of not deploying that tool, which has an annual licensing fee equivalent of 1 full-time equivalent, or hiring 3 people. Like, it makes no sense. Like, sure, it comes with implementation cost, it comes with a little bit of ramp time, it's a new way of learning how to work and so forth. But when you look at it from a 3-year total ownership perspective, it's just cold hard economics in the end of the day. And it's with every message, with every story that you are ever to tell to anyone. If you sell it in the language of the audience, it will resonate with them. The good thing and the horrible thing about CFOs is that while we don't like to invest, we are cold, hard, pragmatic animals in the end of the day. Like, if it makes economic sense, we will do it. Then it becomes the discussion around risk more than anything else. Like, how likely is this actually to work? And how likely can you actually roll that out? And then you solve that through a number of reference customers and similar use cases, right? And then some backstop guarantees in terms of quality assurance. We're good to go.
Yeah, very ROI driven.
Yeah, but it is.
Discussion
Like
approach.
that, I think a lot of the things that people fool themselves with as well, because this is not like we're a subset of this industry, right? A large part of our peer set just don't even think about how an LLM can be your coworker. A lot of them don't even know what an LLM is. So it's an interesting way to ask yourself, or it's an interesting story when you ask yourself, like, how do you anchor this in the first place? So it has to be anchored in something that actually drives engagement in the first place. And hold on, the reality of it, that the only thing that drives true engagement from the CFO is economic efficiency. If it enables revenue, or if it enables me to deploy more money towards the thing that enables revenue, or if it compresses my costs, I'm interested in it.
So, Daniel, to wrap things up, a few questions, rapid fire style. Boldest bet you've made in your career?
Boldest bet. I dove in and picked up a gig in PayPal after we finalized the integration. We went over there. I thought, well, this is going to be the golden handshake, right? Because that's how this dance works. You do the integration, then you're let go. I picked up a gig to start transforming their entire treasury stack. I don't think I've ever had or ever will have the opportunity to deal with that level of complexity. So that was really fun, but also fairly high risk.
Biggest myth about CFO role?
Sorry?
Biggest myth about CFO role?
That we are some kind of superhuman, know-it-all human working computers and calculators. Like, we're leaders, we're here to coach people. We need to enable our people to be fantastic at what they do, but this is all a team sport, especially when we look into growth. Growth is just the team sport of all team sports. Startups can be very fantastic on a few handful of rockstar deployed engineers and salespeople, but if you want to do this as a scale-up level, it's a team sport of team sports.
One tool you couldn't live without?
A proper data environment, Databricks, or MySQL with the risk of showing the gray. I barely get but a good data warehouse.
Who's one person in finance you deeply respect and why?
I really like the storytelling ability of Michael Lewis. If you read any of his books, you can argue, well, is that journalism? Is it storytelling? But it's all in financial space, right? It also highlights the value of telling a strong story. I think that the thing that a lot of CFOs usually put their foot in their mouths of is that they speak numbers rather than stories. And something that resonates with us in the same way that we're hard to talk to is never going to resonate with the CEO that's probably product and sales driven, or with the product team that's driven by commercials and customer utility. So people that take the complex and tell it in a way that's engaging, I find to be very inspiring.
What's one non-finance or maybe finance book every CFO should read?
That every CFO should read. There's a number of, I really like, it's a business book, but it's not a finance book. I think the first good leadership book that I read was Ken Blanchard's Leading at a Higher Level. When it comes to the fundamentals of leadership, like, why should you coach? Why should you stand up these structures? And while it's gotten a lot of critique because it's like from the early 90s or something, there's a reason why it's still being taught in universities. Like, human nature doesn't change.
For sure. Thank you so much, Daniel. That was like super insightful conversation. It was absolutely a blast having you. Thanks for very honest and very, very insightful tactical answers to the questions. This was fantastic.